Good afternoon and thank you for coming to my presentation. The title is The Effects of Types and Sources of Written Corrective Feedback. So those are the independent variables on EFL learner writing performance, and that is the dependent variable. My presentation is divided into 5 parts: introduction, related lit, methodology, results, and conclusion. So let's start with the introduction. Everyone, please take a look at the menu on your desk. So the menu has some errors on them, right? So these errors remind us that it takes a lot for students to learn from their mistakes. And it also reminds us that writing is not easy. Why is it not easy? Well, first of all, we can see that it requires the mastery of skills such as punctuation, spelling, etc. These skills are not required by listening, reading, and speaking. Furthermore, writing is prone to L1 and L2 interference. What does L2 interference mean? Well, basically we can imagine how we ask the students to read an article or read a novel, and there's a lot of informal text. And because of the informal text, their writing gets affected. They also write informally. Writing is not easy. This fact can also be shown through assessment. So in a lot of assessment, students have to take listening and reading parts first before they do the writing part. And in 2017, the GSAT results found that 10% of test takers got a 0 out of 20 points. So should we give up? No, we shouldn't give up, because WCF is a way to help solve this problem. WCF has its roots in L2 writing research, and numerous studies have been done, but one that I would like to point out is the one that was conducted by Kang and Han in 2015. It's a meta-analysis that found that there were moderate to high positive effects of WCF on grammar accuracy. And is it that simple? It's not that simple, because in the same study it was found that there was a disproportion of studies, and it was found that there were many moderator variables, one of which is the type of corrective feedback. So specifically, they found that DCF was more effective than ICF. DCF refers to direct corrective feedback or explicit correction, whereas ICF is more indirect, and it refers to how you just pinpoint the location of the errors. So right now, we know that DCF works better. However, Storch in 2010 said DCF, it requires no effort at all on the part of the learners, and it doesn't allow for reflection. So ICF is better. So the question now is, which one is better, ICF or DCF? So the answer is neither A nor B, because there may be other alternative solutions. And what solutions are there? Let's start with ICCF. So ICCF is basically when you pinpoint the location, but you also give some information. For example, you give the information SP, signifying that it is a spelling mistake. Also, peer feedback based on learning writing by reviewing hypothesis could also help. But now the question is, are these alternatives really better? How are they better? So this leads us to the research questions for the present study. The first research question is whether or not WCF helps improve writing performance. The second research question asks whether the type or the source of the WCF serve as moderator variables. The third one focuses on the type. We zoom in on the type and find out which one is more effective, ICF or ICCF. And if both are effective, what differential effects are there? And finally, the fourth research question focuses on the source. Which one is better, peer feedback or teacher feedback? So we can look at this in terms of a pyramid. So the first research question is all about the grand picture. The second research question focuses on the macro level. And finally, the third and the fourth, they are on micro levels. So why do we need to focus on the micro level? Because the aim of the present research is to find out the most appropriate situations for each source and type of WCF. So let's go to the lit review. We start by asking whether or not WCF works. What does previous literature say? So the red part represents those that say, no, it doesn't work. Especially Truscott. He said that it's harmful, it is useless, and affective. I coined this term myself because ineffective refers to how WCF can cause anxiety among the learners. And there have been studies that have shown the benefits of WCF. For example, Ferris in 1997 said, it's not just enough to give them WCF, you need to give them good WCF. And that entails not giving too many explanations, being consistent, and being clear and unambiguous. Those in the middle, they say, we shouldn't focus on this question, does WCF actually work? Instead, we should focus on, like what Highland and Highland pointed out, this question, when to use which type of WCF in order to maximize the positive benefits. So when do we use DCF? So Chandler in 2003 found that when compared to no WCF, those who received DCF outperformed those who received no WCF. The same was observed by Van Bunigen in 2011. However, Chandler in 2003 said, well, the participants said that there are other types of WCF that may promote more learning opportunities. Van Bunigen in 2011 also found out that in order for WCF to be truly effective, there needs to be some sort of internalization. And what does this entail? 3 things: noticing gaps, testing interlanguage hypothesis, and engaging in reflection. So this shows us that DCF is good as an alternative to no CF. If you're comparing no CF and DCF, use DCF. However, it is not useful when it comes to internalizing errors. So DCF doesn't allow students to really internalize the errors. They just copy the correction, and then that's it. So when and how to use ICF? Well, ICF Chandler in 2000 found that ICF is effective, but only by the 5th writing task, and it reduces 1/3 of all errors. So why is it so effective? Well, because Ellis in 2008 said that errors, they need to be internalized, and ICF does that. However, another question was pointed out. The question is, what if learners do not know how to correct them? You pinpoint the location, but they haven't learned the linguistic structure of that particular error. Park et al. Reiterated this in 2005 by saying that ICF works only for orthography and particle errors. What about other errors that are too challenging or too untreatable? So to summarize, ICF is useful if you want the students to really learn how to correct the mistakes, and it takes a long time. If you want the students to internalize their errors. However, it's not good for untreatable or more difficult errors. What about ICCF? Well, the best way to describe ICCF, I would say, is a piece of steak. So it's hard and soft at the same time. It's hard because it's challenging enough, but it's also soft because it provides scaffolding for the learners. So Jode in 2011 found that both teachers and students provided positive evaluations for ICCF. Why is that so? Well, one, Bichner and Ferris in 2011 found that ICCF provides opportunities for metalinguistic reflection, as opposed to DCF, whereby teachers have to provide the metalinguistic explanation. Murakami and Takashima in 2008 said that the potency of ICF is limited to treatable errors whose linguistic structures have never been learned before. And there have been other studies that have found the positive effects of ICCF. So to summarize, ICCF is good if you want students to reflect, and it's also good for both treatable and untreatable errors. So let's summarize everything for a while. DCF is good for short-term retention, and it's good compared to no CF at all, whereas ICF promotes internalization, and it's good for some easy errors. Untreatable errors, not so good. What about ICCF? Well, brain, it helps you reflect. Time, it's less time consuming than DCF. And Band-Aid, it's useful for treatable and untreatable errors. So these are the research gaps though, because we know that Truscott said, if you give them too much WCF, they will feel anxious. Another research gap is the lack of monitoring procedures. Teachers cannot take care of everyone at the same time. So what is a possible solution? The possible solution is to use peer feedback. And this shows us a quick timeline of peer feedback research. And we know that peer feedback research really reduces apprehension in writing. The problem is, a lot of the peer feedback research is done in L1 and on tertiary learners. And that leads us to the present study where we focus on L2 learners and we also focus on secondary students. So now let's go to the methodology. So we start by talking about the participants. So there were 94 participants who were divided into 4 groups. Those are the 4 groups. And they were all 15 to 16 years old. L1 was Chinese, and their proficiency was comparable. This was done by giving them a placement test to ensure that their proficiency was comparable. And measures to ensure validity and reliability were also carried out. And now let's go to the procedure itself. So on day 1, the raters were given a norming session, and then there was a placement test for the participants, and they were assigned into groups. Day 2, they had to start working on their writing task. After writing, the raters had to give them a score, but for those in groups 3 and 4, the teacher had to give them corrective feedback. Then on day 6, everyone, all the participants had to work on their revision task, and those in groups 1 and 2 had to undergo a training session, and they also provided WCF to each other. So this is provision of WCF from peers, not from teachers. The cycle was repeated 3 times, and on day 96, the last day, they had to fill out a questionnaire. So now let's go to the results and discussion. The first research question again is to find out whether WCF affected writing performance. And the quantitative data said yes. Students students' scores in the first writing task versus the scores in the 4th writing task, there was a significant improvement. Qualitative-wise, when asked, do you think the WCF you received was useful, 93% of them said yes. So how do we explain this? First, let's talk about Van Bunigen. Let's review this for a while. Remember the 3 steps for internalizing errors? So noticing the gap, testing a hypothesis, engaging in reflection. So basically, what WCF does is it pointed out the errors, and it helps students to go to the first step, noticing the gap. And then, so the students didn't have to go through the first step. They went straight to the 2nd and the 3rd steps. So what are the implications? WCF helps students. Students want WCF to be used, and students find WCF to be useful. Therefore, we should use WCF. So the second research question asks whether the type and the source are moderator variables, and quantitative data showed that neither type nor source was a mitigating factor. So whether whether they were given this type or that source of WCF, it didn't matter. All of them showed improvement. In terms of qualitative data, when asked, why do you think it, referring to WCF, was or was not useful, most of the answers were yes, they were useful, and but the reasons were different. So let's look at some of the participants' answers. So let's take this one, for example. The feedback was very helpful from group 1. Another one, more attention was given to me, from group 2. If you take a look at these answers, they are all positive answers. Although the reasons why they thought WCF was useful was different, they all gave positive answers. And this shows us that different types and sources of WCF have different roles, but they all evoke positive feelings. And because of this ability, there was not much difference. Type and source were not found to be moderator variables. What are the implications? Number 1, we have to use WCF, and the source and type do not matter, and it's a security blanket for the students. However, we have to be reminded that different types and sources of WCF have different roles. And now let's explore those roles. Research question 3 zooms in on the type and asks ICF, ICCF, which one is more effective? If both are effective, how are they different? So in terms of quantitative data, those who received ICF found improvements in terms of developmental trajectory. So if you look at the gray line, you'll see that those who received ICF improved by the time they reached task number 3. In terms of ICCF participants, they improved by showing less variance. And in terms of qualitative data, the lower scoring participants, the ICCF group, when asked why they liked the WCF that was given to them, their answers were focused on how detailed ICCF was. So if you give them ICCF, the lower scoring participants will say that, hey, it's very detailed, I like it. So what does this all mean? Well, ICF in the present study helps students improve their scores. And this is in line with what Chandler said when that study found that it took 5 writing tasks before they improved their scores. In the present study, it took 3 writing tasks. ICCF, so let's just imagine this is the group of students who got ICCF in the present study. And there were high achievers and low achievers. And what happened to the low achievers was that because when they write, there were so many errors, some treatable, some untreatable. And the ICCF was able to take care of these untreatable errors and treatable errors. And because of that, their scores started increasing, and therefore the interlearner variance decreased. So implications is we have to remember that ICF and ICCF should not be thought of as mutually exclusive to each other, but there are some minor differences. ICCF is better suited for low proficiency learners, ICF for high proficiency learners. ICCF is for errors, for errors that are untreatable. For errors that are untreatable, those that seem to be too challenging. ICF is for those easier treatable errors. And ICCF, you can see the immediate effect, whereas ICF, it's more about internalization and reflection. So now let's focus on the source. So writing corrective feedback from teachers versus from peers, which one is better? So in terms of quantitative data, those who received WCF from their peers improved in terms of developmental trajectory, whereas those who received WCF from their teachers showed improvement by achieving less variance. So how do we explain these results? Well, peer-initiated WCF, again, showed improvements in developmental trajectory. And to explain this, we can use Connor 1994's, when Connor said that when you give them peer feedback, students experience 3 benefits: linguistic benefit, social, and affective. And these 3 are mirrored by the responses of the students in the questionnaire of the present study. For example, linguistic benefit. Some students who received peer-initiated feedback said, WCF from peers helped me detect errors. And then social benefit, some students said, my classmate can just focus on my work, but the teachers have to focus on everyone's work. And then for affective benefit, I feel more at ease consulting with my classmate. My classmate is less intimidating. For teacher-initiated WCF, let's again imagine a ball. This is a group of students who receive teacher WCF, and they're high and low achieving learners. And then those who are low achieving learners, they received WCF from their teachers, and they felt that WCF from their teachers was much more professional, trustworthy, and because of that, they took it more seriously and worked on the errors. And then that's how their scores increased, and that's also why the variance decreased. So what are the implications? Well, peer and teacher feedback are not mutually exclusive. And how do we incorporate peer feedback in class? We follow these steps. Step 1, I think the teacher still needs to do his or her work by providing feedback for untreatable errors. And then step 2 is there needs to be a training session. Step 3, we need to pair high proficiency and low proficiency learners together so that they can help each other out. Step 4 is we have to encourage discussion and not just WCF provision. And finally, step 5, teachers, they can just facilitate, but they need to walk around and answer the questions of those students engaging in peer feedback. And finally, let's go to the conclusion. So these are the limitations of the present study. But I would like to focus on this, 3 groups. So we know that ICF is for treatable errors, ICCF for untreatable errors. It would be interesting to divide the participants in future studies into 3 groups. Those receiving ICF only, ICCF only, and then the third group is ICF for treatable errors and ICCF for untreatable errors, and see what differences there may be. Thank you very much for listening, and this is the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I open the floor for any questions that you may have. Thank you.